Welcome to 1850 Main Street, a place where friends get together and talk about their country and hope for a brighter future. Today, Rob Walgate and Alan C. Duncan from the Public Square are joined by David Zanotti, the CEO of the American Policy Roundtable.
We've discussed the moments from the vice presidential debate that everyone saw, but what about the major moments that no one seems to be talking about?
So at Halloween time, we plowed in a lot of candy, and the reason we plowed in a lot of candy was because we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, paper route money can only be distributed among 4 kids so far, so there wasn't like a lot of money to go to the local drugstore and pick up candy. We weren't poor, we just didn't have any money. So Halloween was a big deal because we got to get a lot of candy that we would see on the shelves, but we could never buy. And Whoppers was like one of my all-time favorites. I was like the big malted milk ball guy. I thought those things were pretty good. And nothing like sticking your head into a pillowcase. All right, filled with Halloween candy and taking a big deep breath.
Yeah, that's the only place you get that smell. That's true.
It's kind of distinctive. But anyhow, when I think about Whoppers, I usually think about, the little box of candy, but the debate had plenty of serious big Whoppers involved. Now, it's going to sound partisan to say that I think Tim Walz had the biggest, but my bias on that is because I think that he erred in such a huge way on such a huge issue. Now, before I get into that one, let's say that I do think that J.D. Vance was in a tough spot, and I'm not sure I understand the strategy of how he answered the question of whether or not Donald Trump lost the election. I wish we could get to the point as a country where we could come up with a simple understanding that Donald Trump lost the election based on the vote count. There's no question about that. He had 75 million and Biden had more. That's simple. Of course, that's true. We get that. And I don't think that they miscounted all those, the millions of votes of the differential. I think the question is and always will remain, and historically will remain, when all the bias of the names that are currently today gone. History will look back and say that was an election in 2020 where laws were changed outside of the rules of the Constitution that changed the performance of elections, that created an avalanche of mail-in ballots never seen before, which created all kinds of complications in regards to appropriate counting, dating, custody questions, and that in the end, it was a pretty loosey-goosey process, and people are always going to question why you would let anything slide outside the rules that far and then in practice get that far out of control. It was not well done. It wasn't done legally in regards to the way the laws were changed, and in regards to consequentially, it was not done because we weren't ready to prepare the mail-in ballots. It is a very controversial election. He could have simply said it's a controversial election. Yes, Donald Trump lost, but it's controversial. And it's controversial because there were statutory rules that were broken, there were constitutional rules that were broken, and there was a lot of chaos.
But he can't say that because that's not what his boss says. So you're right. He's in a tough spot.
The only time he looked uncomfortable or unsure of himself the entire evening was when he had to defend Donald Trump. He had a grasp of every policy.
Well, I think on that point, I think he did a great job on defending Trump on a number of policies. But I think on that particular one, at least that's what I saw.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, his actions from the 2020 election in defending that, you're not sure whether J.D. Vance agrees with that, but he was walking the company line. And that was the only time he felt a little. Yeah.
Well, and that's the place where Walz had the ability then to start into Whopper land and to then expand on the whole January 6th narrative. We've been through all that. We've all seen it with our own eyes. There's one thing that Walz did at that point. If you go back and play back the tape, he got into the January 6th narrative, and in the way of his very choppy, super fast, hyper delivery, he put together sentences that if you replay them, it sounded like what he said was like he gave a number of hundreds of Capitol Hill police were beaten and later died and then moved on.
I remember that.
That's the way he said it. Did you catch that one, Alan?
I did catch that. Yeah, I hadn't heard that, so it was interesting.
Now, we know with absolute proof point positive, No Capitol Police officers died on January 6th based upon any injury that they received at that time. And some were injured, and that is tragic. It is wrong. There's absolutely no justification. That January 6th was one of the dumbest performances of human beings in the history of the Republic. Let history show the record. That was just plain stupid. And in some instances, their behavior was criminal. Not every instance. So someone being in the vicinity was not a crime, even though some people have been treated that way. The right to be there wasn't the issue.
Sure. Well, and there were some videos where you did see law enforcement removing barriers and allowing people to walk in. So there were some people who were caught up in it that just like, well, what's happening? Can we do this? So there's
wrong place.
Yeah. There's a lot of
place.
There was a big crowd.
Wrong time. And there were people there who were intelligent people who weren't looking for trouble, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They didn't know. Okay. That's fine. The point is, Tim Walz, the way that he said it, would lead any thinking, thoughtful person to believe that the people died of their injuries. That's not true. The only person that died on January 6th was an unarmed woman, an Air Force veteran who was shot in the throat by a Capitol Police officer who was never held accountable for the action.
Ashley Babbitt.
So that's the fact. And what's interesting is Walz wasn't fact-checked on that. And Vance didn't touch it either. Now, I can understand politically why Vance it would happen so fast. Maybe he didn't catch it, or maybe he didn't feel like it was worth it. But because now, see, when you tell the facts, because the narrative is so slid off the other side, it sounds like I'm defending January 6th.
Right. And that's why I think Vance didn't touch it, because he knew if he went there, there was nothing good that would come out of it. He doesn't want to be known as the guy who's defending now January 6th. It can't get any worse. From a political perspective, they're probably thinking, so let it go.
And it points up what Dr. Allen was sharing with us when we were last together at one of our board meetings. It was he said, how much can you do in 2 minutes? How substantive can any conversation be when you have 2 minutes? And then the mic gets turned off. So it's difficult. Now, it took me probably more than 2 minutes to explain what I was trying to get to about trying to balance the scales on January 6th. So that's where sometimes the person with the fastest rhetoric gets away with stuff. It's just like sometimes the person with the fastest getaway car gets away with putting their toes on the edge of election laws. And because of the way that election laws work, because election law is one of the very few laws in our country that has no statute, that has an almost instantaneous statute of limitations, because once the election's done and everything's settled, then no one's going to go back and prosecute retroactively and end or overturn the results of elections. So if there's discrepancies or illegalities in an election and they're not prosecuted immediately, there's no opportunity. Well, how do you prosecute something immediately? It's going to take you 60 days or 90 days to actually investigate what actually happened. It's too late. But people don't think, I've never heard anybody in the media anywhere talk about this practical reality that you learn when you're on the ground doing elections as to how the rules actually play out. But I digress. Let's go back to the biggest whopper that I thought I heard from Tim Walz, and that was on the question of abortion. It's interesting. He was really well trained on the narrative that he wanted to tell. And so like Kamala Harris and like the news media all over the country, they picked out the 2 or 3 names, 2 or 3 instances where women have died from using abortion pills, and then tried to make the transference of saying that it's the ban on abortion that's happening around the country that is creating these deaths. Therefore, it's Donald Trump's fault and it's the pro-life community's fault. That is a blatant lie. The facts just simply don't make that case.
And J.D. Vance did not really call him on that specifically.
Yeah.
You know, that would have been one where maybe you could have taken the time to say, hey, actually, it looks like the abortion pills are doing a lot of the damage here.
Yeah, the young lady that tragically lost her life that went from Georgia to North Carolina to get the pills and to do that, and then from all reports, it basically sounds like, she went septic a few days later and went to get treatment. And
They failed her at that hospital.
The pills,
it seems.
The pills, yes. I think blame can go around to a bunch of different people and places. Yeah. But in no instance should a medical professional be turning away help to someone who is having a medical emergency. That's against the law. I want to know, has Georgia prosecuted or charged anyone with violating the law at those hospitals that turn these people away? That's the bigger question, because that's why this young lady lost her life from taking those pills.
Well, Rob, wouldn't that be a federal prosecution, though? Because that's a federal law that was broken, the EMTLA law, which requires that any hospital receiving Medicare funding must provide stabilizing care for anyone who comes through the door of an emergency room. That's the shorthand for what the law says.
Yeah, you would think they would. The question becomes, do we have the full story of what actually happened? Because the way it's being portrayed in the media, yes, that would be a violation of federal law.
And what people are trying to say on the other side of this issue, and the reason I say the other side of this issue is because we're not making any apologies for being pro-life, but we also want to be pro-fact. All right. I mean, the argument for the preservation of all human life is something that you can say with your feet clearly on the ground. You don't have to be up on the clouds in some ethereal place or some position of profound political advantage or leverage or wedge issuing or fantasy. It's a very real subject. It's been with us for all of time, and it's not going to disappear on Wednesday, November the 6th or the 7th, whatever that, it'll be the 6th. We're going to be at this for a long time. So the reality is that when you look at what was actually happening there, this is not the responsibility of the bans. Furthermore, the whole concept of the ban argument is in and of itself a fallacy. I mean, it would have been a great place. And of course, it's funny because in this debate, I've only had a couple of people call me and say, I wish he would have said this. All right. In the earlier presidential debate, everywhere you turned, there were people with 100 different things that they wish would have been said in that debate. Everywhere you went. Here's have been very few.
I do wish that we've been able to get Abortion in America, our publication, into the hands of both of these candidates before the debate. So I mean, maybe we can still somehow get that book to a lot of elected representatives, no matter the top of the ticket, the bottom of the ticket, anything in between.
I wish the moderators would have had the book.
Sure.
I wish every person that's thinking at all about commenting publicly about abortion would have an opportunity to read this publication and get the baseline facts. For example, what an interesting opportunity had one of the moderators simply said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, have there been more or fewer abortions in America since the Dobbs decision?"
That would have been great for J.D. Vance to bring up as well, as it was talked about.
Could you imagine if they had asked the candidates that question? Do you think they would have been able to answer it accurately?
No.
I think J.D. Vance would have known that. I think he would.
There have been more abortions since Dobbs than there have actually. So you get this. There have been. So when Walz is talking about we're restoring Roe versus Wade, we're restoring Roe versus Wade. Well, wait a second. Why would you want to restore Roe versus Wade? There are more, if you're pro-abortion, there are more abortions being held right now, being conducted right now in America than there were under Roe versus Wade. Does he even know that?
Right. I don't think Walz knows it. Maybe J.D. Vance does know it, but if he knew it, that would have been a great time to use the line. Yeah. I think he would have been smart enough to throw that line out there and talk about it.
How did you guys think that he spoke about abortion broadly? I thought that he struck a very interesting tone, bringing up friends of his. One particular friend that he said was watching that he knows who has had an abortion. He said, "I love you." I kind of appreciated the tone in which he talked about the issue. What did you guys make of that?
I felt that he was most interesting by acknowledging the fact that the pro-life community hasn't done a good enough job.
Yes.
In communicating their message and winning hearts and minds of Americans. Mm-hmm. I thought that was bold. I thought it was honest. I thought it was brave.
When you do the numbers since 1973, the reality is most of us probably know someone near and dear to our heart that has had an abortion.
I probably know four. I think I know 4 or 5 women.
It's not the unforgivable sin. And I appreciated his passionate about it, yet he was tender about it and letting people know that they're loved. And the fact that the Republican Party hasn't done the job, as Dave said, to win the hearts and minds of people to understand the issue.
And Rob, I would say, you said Republican Party, and that's what he said.
Yes.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
I'll take it a step farther and say the pro-life community.
Yes. And church, I would agree with that.
Yeah, that was the only thing I would have tweaked. And again, we're all armchair quarterbacking here. He's in the arena doing it. But he's like, the Republican Party needs to build trust in this area. And I thought, I wouldn't frame it like that. Necessarily. Right. We don't need to trust the Republican Party on this. I think women need to be able to trust themselves. They need to be able to trust that they have resources, that they have family and friends that can help them. We need to trust God more on this. We don't need to necessarily trust Republicans on this. But I got the sentiment of what he was saying.
And let me back this up, because there will be people who hear our comments and they will write us and they will say, you guys have gone soft on the life issue. Because Rob, you just spoke a theological premise, actually a doctrinal premise, that abortion is not the unforgivable sin. I think that the scriptures would hold you out on that. That's true. Abortion, when we reflect upon it, is certainly a grave sin.
Yes.
It is one of the most profound sins against humanity that people can commit, and everyone suffers. It's a sin against the mother. It's the sin against the child. It's the sin against the community. It's a sin against taking a life that God has given. But the judgment for that is uniquely between the person who did it and the people who assisted it and God. And forgiveness is available for that sin as for every sin that we humans commit. So when Jesus was talking about the unforgivable sin, I don't think anyone could even imagine that sin was abortion. We all know that sin wasn't murder. We could list every sin.
It's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. That's what the
unforgivable sin.
That's what Jesus says. Right. So then how you understand what that means, that's a sermon perhaps, but that's what he says it is. A sermon series, yeah, perhaps.
So we're just being honest to try to be doctrinally consistent with the teachings of Christ that we're commissioned to teach through the Great Commission. Then we have to be honest. What you said was right. The problem people have emotionally with this is they are so aggrieved, righteously aggrieved, by the fact that 1 million children in America are dying from abortion, and most of them are abortions that are not being performed to save the life or physical health of the mother. These are abortions that are coming from people ending what they would call unintended or unwanted pregnancies. If for no other reason that there are millions of families praying that they could adopt a baby in America. It's not that the children aren't wanted. The tragedy of this is at multiple levels.
Do you want to know who and what is going to be on your ballot this November? Check out ivoters.com and enter your address and zip code. No name, no phone number, and no email address required. Find out who all the candidates are, who's endorsing them, and who's funding them. We're not bound to any political parties, candidates, or campaigns at iVoters, and we won't tell you who to vote for. You're smart enough to figure that out for yourself. What we will do is give you all the facts and none of the fanfare. Did we mention it's free? Free minds, free speech, free agents. iVoters.com, a public service of the American Policy Roundtable.
Let's get back to the debate. Walz wanted us to believe that the autonomy agenda is the right agenda, but he went a step farther and he walked off the cliff. Because what he really called for in the debate, and he's being completely consistent with Kamala Harris's policy as well as the Democrat Party, and fundamentally the Democrat brain trust and money flow, which comes from the Soros, Podesta, Center for American Progress agenda. For every time you hear Project 2025, what you should insert is Center for American Progress. Because by projecting out onto Project 2025, what the Democrats are attempting to do is to hide the fact that they take their marching orders from George Soros and John Podesta and the Center for American Progress. Those are the people who pay the bills for the Democrat machine, and they're the people who name the tune of the Democrat policy. And that policy is abortion is autonomy, abortion is a wedge issue, and tell whatever story you have to until you get caught, because the media is never going to try to catch you, because autonomy is what it's all about. Walz, however, got into the policy on this, and he stepped on a huge landmine when he basically said that what he advocates is a federal mandatory return to Roe versus Wade. And no one picked up on it. Walz is saying, we don't want the states to have any rights on this whatsoever. He said, quote, that's not how it works. He wants there to be a solo mandate dictated by either the courts or by federal law that basically says, here's abortion policy. And the policy is, you can't stop it. It's autonomy. It's an inherent right. It's a federal protected right. You can't touch it. That's the rule that they have that he signed in Minnesota.
Yes.
Minnesota has one of the most aggressive. Minnesota's law is way past Roe. It's way past Roe. And that's what Walz wants as a national standard. He wants a singular national mandate.
Well, and so that's where you pull back the curtain a little bit. And the guy that shows up in flannels that Barack Obama says you can tell they come out of his closet. This guy's a real deal. This is a football coach. This is just, your everyday guy. Behind that everyman, hey, I'm a gun owner and a hunter. Behind that persona is the most radical abortion policy you could possibly have. We just need to say it like it is.
That's the truth. All you got to do is read it.
Well, you do. All you have to do is read it, and you listen to his own words. I'll edit him a little bit, but he says, works best when you mind your dang business. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The problem is he's a little bit hypocritical on those words, because I believe within about 13 minutes of saying that, he was pressing for an individual mandate for healthcare in this country. And I was like, wait a minute, what happened to minding our own business?
Well, and he said a line, talking back to abortion briefly, he said a line, he said, when the child is born, they were talking about, I need to listen to the quote again, but they were kind of talking about when does a child have rights? When is the person? He talked about helping a child when it's born. Now, we know that in some places, even when that happens, the child is not afforded rights if it was intended to be aborted. But he said very clearly, when the child is born, meaning he does not consider it a child if it is in the womb, based on his own words.
Let's take it a step farther. Minnesota, under Governor Walz, repealed a 2015 law. 6 provisions of that legislation were removed in a repeal measure that Tim Walz signed. And in that repeal measure, it basically removed the protections. Should a child survive an abortion process and be born alive, they are no longer protected in Minnesota. Tim Walz signed that law. That's the biggest whopper of the whole evening. He signed that law. And so when people say that all that rhetoric about born alive, this is not rhetoric. This is true. It's on the record books. But the American media doesn't have the courage or the desire to want to know the whole truth on this, because they love the autonomy fantasy that somehow this election is all about making people free from anyone being able to control. And you know what? I can't even describe autonomy the way that they talk about it. Wow. For them, autonomy is freedom from reality. Yeah. That there is no consequence. That it's just do whatever you want to do and don't worry about it.
But isn't that the only place where their policies line up that way is on the issue of abortion? They don't feel that way on any other issue. They don't feel that way on education. They don't feel that way on taxes. They don't feel that way on healthcare. The only time they want you to be in your own and making your own decisions is when it comes to terminating a pregnancy. That's it.
Keep the government's hands off my body, unless it's putting 2 shots in my arm or I get fired.
Yeah, or a mask over my face, or telling my children what they have to do before they can go to college. And doctors have that right. I mean, our pediatrician won't even see us anymore because we asked about some vaccines on why our male son would need it. Yeah, well, I'm not going to debate that. Okay. Great.
Yeah, Alan, he got thrown out of his own pediatrician's office. They literally canceled. He got canceled by his pediatrician for asking a question about a vaccine.
Wow. Is there that's like a record or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
Then he moved from the Soviet Union.
I have comments, but I'm biting my tongue, so I won't say them.
Right. So there were plenty of whoppers in that debate. And again, the other side will pick on certain things that Vance said and try to pull that thread out as wide as they want. Hey, it's fair game. Both men have to stand for what they said. But I cannot find anything as big as Walz's attempt to masquerade around his actions in Minnesota and what he's really calling for. And I don't know. I truly don't know if most of Americans understood what he was actually telling us the policy is going to be if he and his team get into power.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. And to get the facts on the candidates and issues that are going to be on your ballot this November, visit ivoters.com and enter your address and zip code. No name, no phone number, and no email address required. We don't want your personal information and we don't want your money. We want you to be well informed. So please share this podcast and ivoters.com with a friend today so they too can vote with confidence and encourage others to do the same. Thanks for stopping by today. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.